Don't get in the car. Jerome Washington's voice tears through the executive garage like a prayer ripped from desperate lungs, echoing off concrete walls as he watches Miranda Cross approach the gleaming luxe sedan that will become her tomb if she turns that key. At 38, he carries 15 years of automotive safety expertise that budget cuts made worthless. Knowledge that could save lives but exists only in the mind of a man society has rendered invisible. His broad shoulders shake with the weight of recognition. This isn't just any luxury vehicle, but the exact model his trauma-obsessed son has identified as a rolling death trap through months of sleepless research. The irony burns like acid in his throat. He cleans the offices of executives who profit from automotive negligence while possessing the expertise to expose their deadly secrets. His calloused hands remember inspecting brake systems and steering columns that could kill families, but now those same hands only grip mop handles and cleaning supplies. The fluorescent garage lighting catches the premature silver in his close-cropped hair, each strand a testament to the stress of raising a traumatized child alone while working nights in a building where his former expertise is treated as worthless. Jerome's transformation from respected safety inspector to invisible janitor began 3 years ago when Miranda Washington died in a Honda with recalled brakes. The same defective system his eliminated department could have flagged if corporate budget cuts hadn't prioritized profits over human oversight. His wife's final moments replayed endlessly. The phone call from the hospital, the sight of twisted metal wrapped around a concrete overpass, the realization that her death was preventable if automotive manufacturers valued lives over quarterly earnings. The brake fluid had leaked because of a known defect, one that his expertise could have identified and forced into immediate recall. But his department's elimination 6 months earlier left families vulnerable to corporate negligence. Now his 11-year-old son Malik suffers nightmares filled with grinding metal and brake failures, channeling his trauma into obsessive research about automotive safety violations that keeps their kitchen table covered with printouts of accident reports. The therapy sessions cost money Jerome barely has, but watching his boy draw pictures of mangled cars while explaining how corporate executives calculate that wrongful death settlements are cheaper than engineering fixes breaks his heart. Each night, as Jerome walks through Pinnacle Financial's gleaming corridors, he passes portraits of board members who've never considered how their investment decisions directly impact families whose names they'll never know. The midnight shift suits Jerome's shattered life, allowing him to work while Malik sleeps fitfully in their cramped apartment. But it also forces him to witness the casual cruelty of corporate decision-making through documents carelessly discarded in executive trash bins. He's seen internal memos calculating the cost-benefit analysis of recalls versus lawsuits, emails discussing how to delay safety notifications until after quarterly earnings reports, and financial projections that treat human mortality as acceptable percentage points in profit equations. His former colleagues from the Automotive Safety Division would be horrified by these revelations, but they've all found new careers or given up fighting a system that views their expertise as obstacles to profitability. Jerome's invisible status grants him access to corporate secrets that could save thousands of lives. But speaking up would cost him the only job he's been able to find since his expertise became unmarketable. The weight of this knowledge crushes him daily. Every family photo on executive desks reminds him that these people go home to loved ones while making decisions that ensure other families will be destroyed by preventable automotive tragedies. His silence feels like complicity, but his voice feels powerless against a system designed to ignore inconvenient truths from inconvenient people. Tonight feels different as Jerome spots the luxe sedan waiting in Miranda Cross's designated parking space, its sleek lines hiding the mechanical flaw that his son's research identified as a steering system defect responsible for 12 deaths across 4 states. The manufacturer knows about the problem, but considers the fix too expensive compared to projected lawsuit settlements, a calculation that transforms luxury vehicles into potential murder weapons for unsuspecting drivers. Jerome's hands tremble as he recognizes the specific trim level, production year, and options package that mark this car as part of the deadly batch. His automotive expertise screaming warnings that no one in corporate America wants to hear from a black janitor. Miranda Cross approaches her car with the confident stride of someone who's never considered that her wealth might be built on other people's preventable deaths. Her designer heels clicking against polished concrete as she moves toward a vehicle that represents everything wrong, with a system that prioritizes shareholder returns over human lives. In this moment, Jerome faces the choice that will define his character: remain invisible and safe while watching another family be destroyed by corporate negligence, or risk everything to save the life of a woman who's never acknowledged his existence. The garage air feels thick with possibility and danger as Jerome abandons his cart and runs toward the most powerful person in the building, knowing that these next few seconds will determine whether his expertise finally saves a life or costs him the last shreds of stability that his son depends on. Safety recalls are simply market corrections. Miranda Cross had spoken those words in countless board meetings, her steel-grey eyes never wavering, as she transformed human tragedies into acceptable business terminology that allowed executives to sleep peacefully while profiting from preventable deaths. At 45, she had perfected the art of emotional detachment, viewing automotive fatalities as statistical inevitabilities rather than moral failures that demanded immediate action regardless of cost or inconvenience to quarterly projections. Her corner office on the 45th floor served as mission control for a $9 billion automotive portfolio that could make or break entire manufacturers with a single investment decision. The mahogany desk where she conducted her daily conquests had witnessed hostile takeovers and merger negotiations that affected millions of lives, but Miranda measured success exclusively in percentage points and market share. Her crystal decanter of bourbon cost more than most people's cars, but it tasted like victory, distilled into amber liquid that helped her forget inconvenient truths about how wealth accumulation required willful blindness to its human cost. The floor-to-ceiling windows provided a god's-eye view of a city where people drove cars that her investment decisions had made more dangerous, but Miranda saw only opportunities for profit maximization. Miranda's emotional fortress had been constructed through decades of professional conditioning that taught her to view empathy as weakness and human connection as exploitable vulnerability in a business world where only the ruthless survived long enough to accumulate real power. Her penthouse apartment reflected this philosophy: sterile minimalism with no photographs or personal mementos that might remind her of her own humanity, furniture chosen by designers rather than personal preference. She drove luxury vehicles selected for status rather than safety ratings, trusting that premium prices guaranteed quality, while remaining obliviously ignorant of the mechanical integrity that could mean the difference between arriving home safely and becoming another statistic. Her social circle consisted entirely of other executives who measured relationships in terms of mutual benefit, people who would abandon her the moment she stopped being useful to their careers. The loneliness was crushing but familiar, a price she'd accepted for professional success that left her isolated at the peak of a mountain built from other people's suffering. Her daily routine involved making decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever considering the faces behind the financial projections, The families whose safety depended on investment choices she made based purely on profit potential. The automotive sector had become Miranda's specialty because it offered perfect opportunities to profit from both innovation and negligence, depending on market conditions and regulatory environments that could be influenced through strategic campaign contributions and lobbying efforts. Her portfolio included controlling stakes in 7 major manufacturers, 3 tire companies, 4 parts suppliers, and 2 safety testing firms that she'd acquired not for their commitment to consumer protection, but for their ability to control information flow and influence regulatory processes. She understood instinctively that the automotive industry operated on calculated risks, where human deaths were simply another variable in profit equations, mathematical problems to be solved through legal strategies and public relations campaigns rather than engineering improvements. Miranda had perfected the art of transforming preventable tragedies into investment opportunities, buying automotive stocks at discount prices immediately after recall announcements and selling them once media attention shifted to newer scandals. The legal settlements that destroyed families were nothing more than operational expenses in her calculations, predictable costs that smart investors factored into their projections, like insurance premiums or regulatory compliance fees. Her success required systematic indifference to the human consequences of her decisions, emotional detachment from the reality that her wealth accumulation depended on other people's preventable deaths. Tonight, Miranda approaches her brand-new Lux sedan with the same casual confidence she brings to board meetings where human lives are reduced to acceptable loss ratios and safety recalls are treated as minor inconveniences to quarterly earnings projections. The vehicle represents everything she values: luxury, status, technological sophistication, and premium engineering that justifies its astronomical price through superior performance and aesthetic design that announces her success to anyone sophisticated enough to recognize automotive excellence. She selected this particular model based on magazine reviews that praised its acceleration and interior appointments, rather than safety ratings that might have revealed the mechanical flaws hidden beneath its flawless exterior. Her key fob feels solid and reassuring in her manicured hand, technology that promises effortless control over 2 tons of German engineering designed to provide comfort and security for executives whose investment decisions determine whether other families can afford vehicles with basic safety features. The garage lighting reflects off her car's pristine paint job, like a mirror that shows only surface perfection while concealing the deadly flaws beneath, much like Miranda's own carefully constructed image that presents competence and success while hiding the moral emptiness. In less than 30 seconds, she'll discover that her investment portfolio has been writing checks that her own life might be forced to cash, that the automotive negligence she's enabled through strategic indifference has finally found its way to her own doorstep. "Ma'am, don't get in that car!" The words explode from Jerome's chest like a gunshot in the silence of the executive garage, his voice carrying 15 years of automotive expertise compressed into a desperate warning that shatters the comfortable distance between corporate power and personal consequence. At 6:47 p.m., as most of Pinnacle Financial empties and shadows lengthen across polished concrete, Jerome spots Miranda Cross striding toward her designated parking space with the confident efficiency of someone who's never considered that her investment decisions might literally kill her before midnight. His recognition of the gleaming Lux sedan triggers a cascade of horror. This isn't just any luxury vehicle, but the exact model, year, and trim level that his son's trauma-driven research has identified as part of a deadly batch with steering defects that lock without warning at highway speeds. The manufacturer knows about the 12 deaths across 4 states, but considers the recall too expensive compared to projected lawsuit settlements, a calculation that transforms Miranda's premium purchase into a potential murder weapon disguised as German engineering excellence. Jerome abandons his maintenance cart without thinking, muscle memory from his former life as a safety inspector overriding 3 years of careful invisibility as he runs toward the woman whose death he can prevent. His work boots echo against the concrete like drumbeats of urgency, each step carrying him further from the safe anonymity of janitorial invisibility toward a confrontation that could cost him everything. Miranda freezes mid-stride, her designer heels suspended inches from the polished floor, as Jerome's desperate warning cuts through the comfortable assumptions that wealth provides protection from the mechanical failures that plague less expensive vehicles driven by expendable families. Her perfectly styled head turns toward the source of the interruption, steel-gray eyes processing the sight of the building's night janitor, abandoning his assigned duties to approach her with urgent steps and desperate eyes that carry knowledge she's never bothered to acquire. Every fiber of her corporate training screams that this is inappropriate, unprofessional, the kind of boundary violation that requires immediate correction through human resources departments and disciplinary action that would remind the building's invisible workforce of their proper place in social hierarchies. Her manicured hand hovers over the door handle of her luxe sedan, its chrome surface reflecting garage lighting like a mirror that shows only surface perfection while concealing the deadly flaws beneath premium engineering. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Receiving automotive advice from someone whose job description includes emptying her trash feels like a violation of natural order. But something in Jerome's voice carries the weight of absolute certainty that can't be faked or manufactured through desperation alone. The silence stretches between them like a bridge neither wants to cross first. Corporate privilege confronting working-class expertise across a divide that measures not just racial and economic differences, but the vast gulf between those who profit from automotive negligence and those who suffer its consequences. Jerome's hands tremble as he approaches the most powerful person in the building, knowing that his next words will either save a life or destroy the fragile stability that his traumatized son depends on for recovery from witnessing their family's destruction by the same corporate negligence that now threatens Miranda's life. His voice carries the steady authority of someone trained to spot mechanical failures before they become fatal accidents. 15 years of expertise compressed into urgent explanation that cuts through social barriers with the precision of life or death knowledge that transcends job titles and corporate hierarchies. That steering system has a critical defect, he says, his dark eyes meeting her grey ones across a chasm that measures not just social distance, but the fundamental difference between those who create automotive safety regulations and those who profit from circumventing them through legal technicalities and regulatory capture. The words tumble out with increasing urgency as Jerome explains the pattern his son discovered. 12 deaths across 4 states, all involving the same steering lockup that transforms responsive vehicles into unguided missiles, all covered up by manufacturers who calculated that lawsuit settlements cost less than comprehensive recalls. Miranda's expression cycles through confusion, annoyance, and something approaching recognition as she processes information that should be classified, but exists in the obsessive research of a traumatized child whose father once possessed the expertise to prevent these tragedies. The garage air seems to thicken with possibility and danger as 2 lives hang in the balance, hers, which could end in twisted metal and shattered glass, and his, which could end in unemployment and homelessness if she chooses to view his warning as presumptuous interference. The moment crystallizes into a choice that will define both their characters and determine whether corporate negligence claims another victim or finally faces consequences from someone with the power to demand accountability from manufacturers who've learned to weather recall storms through legal strategies and public relations campaigns rather than engineering improvements. Miranda stares at her car with new eyes, seeing not just luxury and status, but potential mechanical failure wrapped in deceptive beauty, premium engineering that might hide fatal flaws known to executives who decided that her life was worth less than the cost of comprehensive recalls. Jerome watches her internal struggle, understanding that she's processing not just his warning, but the implications of a system where her own investment decisions have created the conditions for her potential death, where the automotive negligence she's enabled through strategic indifference has finally found its way to her own doorstep. The silence that follows carries the weight of recognition that wealth provides no protection from mechanical failures, when those failures result from corporate decisions that prioritize profit over human life. That executive status means nothing when steering systems lock without warning and transform luxury sedans into death traps that don't discriminate between janitors' families and CEOs. Her hand remains suspended over the door handle while Jerome's expertise hangs in the air between them. Life-saving knowledge that could prevent another family from experiencing the trauma that destroyed his son's childhood and left him cleaning offices where executives profit from the same corporate indifference that killed his wife. In this moment that will determine whether his discarded expertise finally saves a life or costs him everything he has left, the garage becomes a courtroom where truth confronts power and human knowledge challenges corporate hierarchy in a battle that could save or destroy them both. "You're telling me my own investment is trying to kill me?" Miranda's voice cuts through the garage air like shattered glass, her corporate mind struggling to process the impossible mathematics of a system where her wealth accumulation strategies have literally manufactured the instrument of her potential death. Jerome nods grimly, his 15 years of automotive expertise compressed into this moment where abstract financial decisions collide with concrete mechanical reality, where the woman who profits from regulatory capture faces the consequences of her own corporate negligence in the form of a steering system that could lock without warning. Every fiber of Miranda's professional training screams that this is absurd, that premium vehicles driven by executives like herself couldn't possibly harbor the same deadly defects that plague cheaper cars driven by expendable families whose deaths generate lawsuit settlements rather than recall campaigns. Her steel-gray eyes flick between Jerome's desperate face and the pristine Lux sedan that represents everything she's achieved through decades of calculated risks and strategic investments. Its flawless exterior hiding mechanical flaws that her own portfolio companies decided were cheaper to defend in court than fix on assembly lines. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Accepting automotive advice from a black janitor feels like a violation of every social hierarchy she spent her career climbing. But rejecting expertise that could save her life feels like the kind of fatal arrogance that transforms corporate executives into cautionary tales. Jerome's knowledge carries the weight of personal tragedy that can't be faked or manufactured, the kind of devastating certainty that comes from watching your family destroyed by the same corporate negligence that now threatens her life. Miranda's hand hovers over the chrome door handle like a sword of Damocles, her manicured fingers inches from activating the ignition system that could transform her luxury sedan into an unguided missile if Jerome's warning proves accurate, and the steering locks during her drive home through city traffic. The mathematical precision of her dilemma is brutal. Trusting a janitor's expertise means acknowledging that her investment strategies have been writing checks in other people's blood, that her wealth requires willful blindness to the human cost of corporate decisions that treat safety recalls as optional business expenses. Her corporate instincts catalog the professional risks of listening to him. Potential lawsuits if she acts on unverified information, embarrassment if his claims prove false, damage to her reputation if word spreads that she took automotive advice from building maintenance staff who lack the credentials and social standing required for credible expertise. But stronger than these career concerns is Jerome's desperate sincerity. The way his voice carries absolute conviction born from knowledge tested by tragedy and validated through personal loss that transformed him from respected safety inspector into invisible janitor whose discarded expertise could finally save a life. The silence between them stretches like a tightrope over an abyss, each second carrying the weight of a decision that will determine whether corporate negligence claims another victim or faces consequences from someone with the power to demand accountability. Her reflection in the car's chrome surface shows a woman processing the recognition that her investment decisions have literally manufactured the instrument of her potential death, that the corporate negligence she's enabled through strategic indifference has finally found its way to her own doorstep. Jerome's explanation unfolds like a medical diagnosis for a terminal illness, each detail adding weight to the crushing realization that Miranda's investment portfolio has been systematically enabling the automotive negligence that could kill her before she reaches the freeway on-ramp, where steering failures typically occur at speeds that transform mechanical problems into fatal accidents. Your company owns controlling stakes in the manufacturers, the parts suppliers, and the testing firms, he says, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he's revealing. The way her wealth has created a vertically integrated system of corporate negligence that protects profits while endangering lives through regulatory capture and legal strategies. The specific technical details Jerome provides, production dates, VIN ranges, failure patterns that correlate with highway speeds and steering angle combinations, carry the precision of someone trained to identify mechanical flaws before they become fatal accidents. Expertise that her own board meetings have systematically ignored because acknowledging these problems would require engineering solutions that reduce shareholder returns. Miranda processes the impossible irony that her success has required creating the conditions for her own potential death, that the automotive investments she's cultivated through strategic political contributions and regulatory influence have produced vehicles that could kill her as suddenly and violently as they've killed families whose names appear only on legal settlements. The garage lighting reflects off her car's pristine surface like a mirror that shows only aesthetic perfection while concealing mechanical realities that transform luxury vehicles into potential murder weapons for consumers who trust that premium prices guarantee safety and reliability. The moment demands a choice that will define her character and determine whether she continues to embody the corporate values that have made her wealthy or acknowledges the human cost of investment strategies that treat safety recalls as market corrections rather than moral emergencies. The choice crystallizes into a binary decision between corporate loyalty and personal survival, between maintaining comfortable illusions about the moral neutrality of investment strategies and acknowledging that her wealth has been built on preventable deaths that could now include her own if she chooses executive arrogance over janitor expertise. Jerome watches her internal struggle with the patience of someone who understands that privilege creates psychological barriers to accepting inconvenient truths, that executives like Miranda have been systematically insulated from the consequences of their decisions through wealth and social position that make corporate negligence feel like abstract business strategy rather than concrete human tragedy. The steering pump manufacturing plant in Ohio has been hiding defect reports for 8 months, he continues, his knowledge carrying the weight of documentation that his son's obsessive research has uncovered through late-night investigation of corporate websites, recall databases, and safety bulletins that paint a picture of systematic cover-ups designed to protect stock prices and executive bonuses. Miranda's reflection in the car's chrome handle shows a woman processing the recognition that her investment decisions have literally manufactured the instrument of her potential death, that the corporate negligence she's enabled through strategic indifference has finally found its way to her own doorstep in the form of technology that could malfunction without warning. The silence that follows carries the weight of a decision that will determine whether she trusts the expertise of a man society has rendered invisible or maintains faith in the corporate systems that have enriched her while endangering countless others through systematic negligence disguised as acceptable business risk. In this moment, suspended between her luxury car and a janitor's warning, Miranda Cross faces the choice that will either save her life or confirm that corporate arrogance is literally a fatal flaw. When the systems you've created turn against their creators with mechanical precision and lethal consequences that no amount of wealth or status can prevent. Your money is written in blood. Jerome's words hang in Miranda's corner office like smoke from an explosion, each syllable carrying the weight of 12 preventable deaths and countless families destroyed by the automotive investments that built her $9 billion empire on a foundation of corporate negligence, disguised as acceptable business risk. At midnight, the city lights beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows provide a backdrop of twinkling indifference to the moral earthquake taking place 45 floors above streets where people drive cars that her portfolio companies know will kill them while executives count profits from their deaths. The conference table is covered with printouts that Jerome's traumatized son has researched with the obsessive intensity of a child trying to prevent another tragedy. Accident reports that read like horror stories, internal memos revealing corporate calculations where human lives are measured against quarterly earnings, safety bulletins that should have triggered immediate recalls but instead disappeared into legal departments. Miranda pours herself bourbon from the crystal decanter that usually celebrates successful mergers, but tonight the amber liquid tastes like medicine for wounds that are still being diagnosed. Liquid courage for truths that require more strength than she's ever needed for hostile takeovers or boardroom battles. Jerome sits in the leather chair normally reserved for heads of state, his janitor's uniform a stark contrast to the mahogany and crystal surrounding them. But his presence commands the room with authority that transcends clothing as he lays out evidence that threatens to destroy everything she's built. The irony burns like acid. She's been cleaning up financial messes while he literally cleans up after the executives who create the conditions for mechanical failures that transform luxury vehicles into death traps. The documents tell a story Miranda recognizes but has never examined from the perspective of victims whose families receive legal settlements instead of living relatives. A narrative of systematic negligence, where her investment committee has been actively enabling automotive manufacturers to treat safety defects as acceptable business risks rather than moral emergencies requiring immediate engineering solutions. Pinnacle Financial owns controlling stakes in 7 manufacturers, 3 parts suppliers, 4 testing firms, and 2 legal consulting groups. Jerome explains, his voice carrying the steady authority of someone trained to see patterns that corporate executives miss because their wealth insulates them from consequences, which means your investment decisions directly influence recall timing, safety testing protocols, regulatory compliance strategies, and legal defense tactics. Each revelation hits Miranda like physical blows because the evidence is undeniable. internal emails discussing how to delay safety notifications until after quarterly earnings reports, financial projections that calculate optimal timing for disclosure based on stock price impact rather than human safety, strategic political contributions designed to weaken regulatory oversight that might threaten profitable relationships with manufacturers. The mathematical precision of corporate evil is breathtaking in its efficiency, a vertically integrated system of negligence where her wealth accumulation requires systematic indifference to preventable deaths that generate lawsuit settlements treated as operational expenses rather than moral failures demanding immediate corrective action. Jerome's former expertise as an automotive safety inspector allows him to decode the technical language that disguises deadly mechanical flaws as acceptable design compromises, revealing how her portfolio companies have been manufacturing death traps disguised as luxury vehicles through cost-cutting measures that prioritize shareholder returns over consumer safety. The recognition is devastating. She hasn't just been profiting from automotive negligence, she's been architecting the system that enables manufacturers to hide safety defects until lawsuit settlements become more cost-effective than engineering solutions. The most damning evidence comes in the form of Jerome's personal story. His wife's death transformed from abstract statistic into concrete tragedy that illustrates exactly how Miranda's investment strategies translate into human suffering through mechanical failures that her own companies could prevent if profit motives didn't override moral imperatives to protect innocent consumers from preventable harm. Maria died because of recalled brakes that your portfolio company manufactured, Jerome says, his voice carrying the weight of personal loss that transforms corporate negligence from business strategy into murder weapon. Brakes that your investment committee knew were defective 8 months before the accident, that your legal department calculated were cheaper to defend in wrongful death lawsuits than fix on assembly lines. The Honda that killed his wife wasn't just a vehicle with mechanical problems, it was the direct product of investment decisions that Miranda personally approved. Board meetings where she voted to maintain profitable relationships with manufacturers who treat safety, recalls as optional business decisions rather than mandatory responses to engineering failures. Miranda reads her own signature on documents approving investment strategies that include campaign contributions to politicians who weaken automotive oversight, media investments that minimize recall coverage, and legal retainers for firms specializing in limiting corporate liability for preventable deaths through settlement negotiations. The recognition is devastating. She hasn't just been profiting from automotive negligence, she's been architecting the system that enables manufacturers to hide safety defects until lawsuit settlements become more cost-effective than engineering solutions, creating legal and financial structures that make preventable deaths profitable for executives willing to calculate human lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of shareholder returns. The silence in her office carries the weight of recognition that Miranda's empire has been built on graves she never bothered to count, that her investment success required willful blindness to a corporate murder machine that treats automotive deaths as acceptable percentage points in profit equations designed to maximize returns while minimizing accountability. Jerome's final revelation completes the circle of corporate complicity that has transformed Miranda's investment portfolio into a killing machine operated through legal proxies and financial instruments that distance executives from the blood on their hands, while maximizing returns from systematic negligence that treats automotive deaths as acceptable business risks rather than preventable tragedies requiring immediate action. Your current automotive holdings include investments in companies that are actively hiding safety defects affecting over 2 million vehicles, he says, his dark eyes meeting her grey ones across a moral chasm that measures not just racial and economic differences, but the fundamental divide between those who profit from death and those who suffer its consequences through personal tragedy. The steering defect that nearly killed her tonight isn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of corporate negligence that her own investment decisions have systematically enabled through strategic political influence, regulatory capture, and legal strategies designed to make safety recalls optional rather than mandatory when mechanical failures are discovered through engineering analysis. Miranda stares at financial documents that chronicle her complicity in automotive deaths that could have been prevented with earlier recalls, reading her own approvals for investment strategies that prioritize shareholder returns over human safety through systematic exploitation of regulatory loopholes and legal technicalities that transform preventable homicide into acceptable business practices. The weight of this knowledge settles on her shoulders like a burial shroud as she realizes that every dividend payment, every quarterly bonus, every stock appreciation in her automotive portfolio has been purchased with human blood from families whose names she'll never know and whose deaths she never bothered to count. The conference room feels like a confessional where she is simultaneously priest and penitent, judge and defendant, victim and perpetrator of a system that she helped create and perfected without ever considering its human cost, because wealth had insulated her from consequences that fell exclusively on people who couldn't afford lawyers, lobbyists, or legislators capable of protecting them from the corporate murder machine that her investment strategies had systematically enabled through decades of strategic indifference to preventable human suffering disguised as acceptable market risk. We've been running a murder factory disguised as an investment portfolio. Miranda's voice cracks as she scrolls through encrypted files that Jerome's investigation has uncovered, revealing how her most trusted board members have been orchestrating automotive deaths across multiple manufacturers while calculating that her ignorance provides plausible deniability for systematic negligence that generates billions in profit through preventable tragedies. Harold Westbrook, her longtime mentor and board chairman, appears in email chains discussing optimal timing for safety disclosure based on stock price volatility rather than human lives endangered by mechanical defects that engineering teams have identified but legal departments have buried under non-disclosure agreements. The conspiracy reaches into every level of her corporate empire. Automotive executives who hide defect reports in exchange for continued investment, regulatory officials who delay recall notifications in exchange for campaign contributions, legal firms that specialize in transforming wrongful death lawsuits into acceptable business expenses through settlement negotiations. Miranda's hands tremble as she reads internal communications, revealing how her board has been manipulating recall timing to minimize stock price impact while maximizing the window of opportunity for defective vehicles to claim additional victims whose deaths generate lawsuit settlements that cost less than comprehensive engineering solutions. The mathematical precision of their evil is breathtaking. Actuarial tables that calculate optimal death tolls, financial models that project maximum acceptable casualties before public outrage threatens political protection, legal strategies that ensure wrongful death settlements remain cheaper than safety improvements. Jerome watches her discover that her wealth has been systematically built on graves she never bothered to count, that her investment success required willful blindness to a corporate murder machine that treats automotive deaths as acceptable percentage points in profit equations. The scope of corruption extends far beyond automotive manufacturing into a web of political influence and regulatory capture that has systematically weakened safety oversight to protect profitable relationships between investment firms and manufacturers who treat consumer protection as optional business expenses rather than fundamental moral obligations. Miranda's own political action committee appears in financial records showing strategic campaign contributions to senators who oppose automotive safety legislation, House representatives who vote against recall notification requirements, and regulatory appointees who prioritize industry concerns over public safety in decisions that determine whether defective vehicles get fixed or hidden. The automotive lobby that her investments fund has been systematically dismantling safety regulations through legislative influence that treats human lives as acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of reduced compliance costs that boost corporate profits while endangering innocent consumers who trust that government oversight protects them from preventable mechanical failures. Jerome's research reveals how her board members have been coordinating with automotive executives to suppress safety data through legal challenges that delay recall notifications, media campaigns that minimize public awareness of defect patterns, and scientific studies designed to create confusion about causation between mechanical failures and fatal accidents. The regulatory agencies supposed to protect public safety have been systematically captured through revolving door employment policies that reward officials who prioritize industry concerns over consumer protection, creating government oversight that functions as corporate protection rather than public safety enforcement. Miranda processes the crushing recognition that her political contributions haven't just influenced legislation, they've systematically dismantled the safety net that was supposed to protect families like Jerome's from the automotive negligence that her investments have made profitable through regulatory capture and legal immunity. Miranda's investigation reveals that her investment empire has been functioning as the financial engine for a systematic conspiracy that transforms automotive manufacturing from transportation technology into mass casualty events through coordinated negligence that treats safety recalls as optional business decisions rather than mandatory responses to engineering failures that endanger human lives. The testing firms that her portfolio controls have been falsifying safety data to protect manufacturers from recall obligations, producing fraudulent reports that disguise deadly mechanical flaws as acceptable performance variations while suppressing engineering analysis that reveals how design compromises prioritize cost reduction over consumer safety. Legal consulting groups funded through her investments have been developing strategies to limit corporate liability for preventable deaths through settlement negotiations that require non-disclosure agreements, preventing families from sharing information about defect patterns that might trigger class action lawsuits or regulatory investigations that could expose the systematic nature of automotive negligence. Jerome's documentation shows how her board has been coordinating recall timing across multiple manufacturers to minimize cumulative impact on automotive stock prices, treating safety notifications as market management tools rather than urgent public health communications that should prioritize consumer protection over investor concerns about quarterly earnings projections. The conspiracy has been operating with mathematical precision that would be admirable if applied to humanitarian purposes, rather than mass casualty events generated through corporate negligence that treats automotive deaths as acceptable business strategy rather than preventable tragedy requiring immediate systematic reform. Miranda stares at organizational charts that map the web of corruption her investments have funded, realizing that her wealth has created a shadow government that prioritizes corporate profits over human life through systematic subversion of every institution designed to protect consumers from the automotive negligence that has made her rich while destroying families whose names she'll never know. They want me fired for saving your life. Jerome's voice carries bitter irony as he explains how his supervisor, Carl Brennan, delivered the ultimatum: apologize for harassing executives and accept a formal reprimand, or face immediate termination for violating corporate protocol that prohibits maintenance staff from interacting with upper management outside their designated cleaning duties. The Human Resources Department has classified his warning as inappropriate workplace conduct that created unnecessary alarm and disrupted normal business operations. Corporate language that transforms life-saving expertise into punishable offense while protecting the executives whose investment decisions manufacture the conditions for preventable deaths. Miranda processes the crushing irony that her company's employee handbook literally prohibits janitors from preventing CEO deaths, that corporate hierarchy values social boundaries more than human life, that the man who saved her from becoming another automotive fatality now faces unemployment because speaking truth to power violates policies designed to maintain comfortable ignorance. The mathematics of injustice are staggering. Jerome risks losing the health insurance that pays for Malik's trauma therapy, the steady income that keeps them housed in an apartment where his son can recover from witnessing his mother's preventable death, the employment stability that provides the only security an 11-year-old boy has left after corporate negligence destroyed his family. Malik's condition has worsened since news reports began covering additional automotive deaths that his obsessive research predicted, each new fatality confirming his worst fears about a world where corporate executives calculate that his mother's life was worth less than the cost of comprehensive recalls. Jerome faces an impossible choice between protecting his son's fragile recovery and accepting the systematic injustice of a corporate structure that punishes heroism while rewarding the negligence that killed his wife and threatens to destroy other families through mechanical failures disguised as acceptable business risks. Miranda confronts her own version of impossible mathematics as board pressure intensifies to silence Jerome permanently through legal action that would destroy his life while protecting the automotive investments that generate billions in profit through preventable deaths, disguised as statistical inevitabilities rather than systematic corporate murder coordinated through financial instruments and regulatory capture. Harold Westbrook has made the ultimatum explicit. Either she destroys Jerome's credibility through defamation lawsuits and criminal charges for corporate espionage, or the board will initiate proceedings to remove her as CEO for compromised judgment and inability to maintain necessary business relationships with automotive manufacturers who view her growing conscience as existential threat to profitable negligence. The legal department has prepared a comprehensive character assassination strategy that would paint Jerome as a disgruntled employee with mental health issues stemming from his wife's death, a desperate father willing to fabricate safety concerns to extort money from executives through manufactured crisis that exploits corporate liability fears for personal financial gain. Her board members have made it clear that choosing conscience over profit would result in her removal from all corporate positions, legal action to recover compensation for breach of fiduciary duty, and systematic destruction of her professional reputation through industry blacklisting that would prevent future employment in financial services. The stakes couldn't be higher. Accepting corporate demands means complicity in Jerome's destruction and continued participation in systematic automotive murder, while rejecting them means losing everything she's built through decades of calculated ruthlessness that suddenly feels like preparation for this moment when wealth accumulation strategies collide with moral imperatives. Miranda stares at legal documents that would transform Jerome from hero into villain, while protecting the investment portfolio that generates profits through preventable deaths. Corporate machinery designed to eliminate inconvenient truths and preserve comfortable illusions about the moral neutrality of business decisions. The human cost of corporate conspiracy becomes viscerally real as Miranda witnesses Jerome's growing desperation about Malik's deteriorating condition, The way her decision to investigate automotive negligence has triggered a cascade of trauma responses in a child whose obsessive research into safety violations represents his attempt to prevent other families from experiencing the sudden, violent loss that destroyed his sense of security. "He's been drawing pictures of crashed cars again," Jerome explains, his voice breaking as he describes how his son's therapy sessions have become dominated by fears that the automotive deaths they've exposed will somehow reach their family again. That speaking truth about corporate negligence has painted targets on their backs that make them vulnerable to retaliation from companies that treat whistleblowing as existential threat to profitable business models. Malik's latest artwork shows stick figures trapped in burning vehicles while suited executives count money, a child's interpretation of corporate evil that captures the moral reality Miranda has been systematically avoiding through wealth-insulated ignorance about how investment strategies translate into human suffering through mechanical failures. The therapy bills that Jerome can barely afford will become impossible if he loses his job. But staying employed requires accepting systematic injustice that treats corporate negligence as acceptable business practice, while punishing the expertise that could prevent automotive deaths through immediate recall campaigns designed to protect public safety rather than preserve shareholder returns. Miranda faces the crushing recognition that her wealth has been systematically destroying families like Jerome's, while insulating her from consequences through corporate structures that distance executives from the blood on their hands. That choosing conscience over profit means acknowledging decades of complicity in preventable deaths that generated dividends for shareholders who never learned the names of their victims. The silence in her office carries the weight of a decision that will determine whether she remains complicit in systematic murder or accepts the financial destruction that comes with moral awakening. Whether she protects the investment empire built on automotive negligence or chooses human decency at the cost of everything she's accumulated through strategic exploitation of regulatory loopholes that make preventable deaths profitable for executives willing to sacrifice consumer safety for shareholder wealth. "Every signature I've made has been written in someone else's blood." Miranda's voice cracks as she stares at the boardroom where 12 executives wait for her decision to either destroy Jerome and maintain profitable automotive investments or choose conscience over wealth in a moment that will define whether she remains complicit in systematic murder or accepts the financial destruction that comes with moral awakening. Harold Westbrook sits at the far end of the mahogany table like a judge preparing to deliver sentence. His silver hair and expensive suit representing decades of corporate wisdom that treats human lives as acceptable business expenses while maximizing returns through regulatory capture and legal strategies designed to make preventable deaths profitable for shareholders. The legal documents spread before her offer two paths: sign the character assassination papers that would paint Jerome as mentally unstable and criminally motivated, or accept removal proceedings that would strip her of corporate positions while ensuring that automotive manufacturers maintain investment relationships with executives who understand that questioning safety protocols threatens profitable negligence. Miranda's hands tremble as she processes the mathematical precision of corporate evil, the way her board has systematically enabled automotive deaths through investment strategies that treat recall notifications as market management tools rather than urgent public safety communications designed to protect innocent consumers from mechanical failures. The bourbon that once tasted like victory now burns her throat like liquid guilt as she recognizes that her wealth accumulation has required willful blindness to preventable tragedies that destroy families while generating profit for executives who measure success in stock prices rather than preserved lives. The silence in the boardroom carries the weight of 12 automotive deaths that her investment decisions could have prevented, Families destroyed while she celebrated quarterly earnings that rewarded systematic negligence through financial incentives that make killing consumers more profitable than protecting them through safety investments. The moment crystallizes into a binary choice between everything she's built through decades of calculated ruthlessness and the moral awakening that demands destroying her corporate empire to save lives that her investment strategies have been systematically endangering through automotive negligence disguised as acceptable market risk. Miranda thinks of Jerome's face when he described his wife's preventable death, the way his voice carried absolute certainty that Maria Washington died because corporate executives calculated that her life was worth less than the cost of comprehensive brake recalls that might have reduced quarterly profit projections and executive compensation packages. She remembers Malik's drawings of crashed cars and broken families, a child's interpretation of corporate evil that captures the moral reality of investment strategies that treat automotive deaths as acceptable percentage points in profit equations designed to maximize returns while minimizing accountability for preventable human suffering. The legal papers before her represent more than just corporate protection. They symbolize a system that rewards systematic indifference to human life, while punishing the expertise that could prevent automotive tragedies through immediate safety improvements that her companies could afford, but choose not to implement because dead consumers generate more profit than living ones. Harold's expectant stare carries the weight of corporate tradition that has made automotive deaths profitable for executives willing to sacrifice consumer safety for shareholder wealth. But Miranda feels the pull of conscience that demands acknowledging decades of complicity in preventable tragedies that her investment decisions have enabled through systematic regulatory capture and legal strategies. The choice couldn't be clearer. Maintain profitable relationships with automotive manufacturers who treat safety recalls as optional business decisions, or choose human decency at the cost of everything she's accumulated through systematic exploitation of regulatory loopholes that make preventable deaths acceptable business strategy. Miranda's decision erupts from some deep place where moral clarity finally overwhelms financial calculation, where the human cost of corporate conspiracy becomes more real than stock prices and quarterly projections that have insulated her from consequences through wealth that requires other people's suffering to maintain its mathematical precision. Miranda's decision erupts from some deep place where moral clarity finally overwhelms financial calculation, where the human cost of corporate conspiracy becomes more real than stock prices and quarterly projections that have insulated her from consequences through wealth that requires other people's suffering to maintain its mathematical precision. "I won't sign these papers," she says, her voice carrying surprising strength as she pushes the character assassination documents across the mahogany table toward Harold's shocked face. "And I won't be party to destroying a man whose only crime was preventing my death from the automotive negligence that this board has been systematically enabling through investment strategies that treat human lives as acceptable business expenses." The boardroom erupts in protests and threats as 12 executives realize that their profitable conspiracy faces exposure from someone with the corporate authority to demand accountability from manufacturers who've learned to hide safety defects until lawsuit settlements become more cost-effective than engineering improvements that might protect consumer safety but reduce shareholder returns. Miranda stands slowly, her decision carrying the weight of moral awakening that transforms her from willing participant in systematic automotive murder into potential whistleblower whose testimony could expose decades of coordinated negligence disguised as acceptable market risk through regulatory capture and legal strategies designed to make preventable deaths profitable for corporations willing to sacrifice human life for shareholder wealth. Effective immediately, Pinnacle Financial is divesting from all automotive investments pending comprehensive safety audits. she announces, her words triggering a cascade of angry objections from board members who understand that choosing conscience over profit means destroying the financial empire they've built through systematic indifference to preventable tragedies. Harold's face cycles through shock, rage, and calculating coldness as he processes the recognition that Miranda's moral awakening threatens not just their automotive profits, but the entire corporate structure that enables investment firms to profit from regulatory capture while remaining insulated from consequences through legal distance that transforms systematic homicide into acceptable business practice. The aftermath unfolds with brutal efficiency as Harold triggers removal proceedings designed to strip Miranda of corporate authority while ensuring that automotive manufacturers maintain profitable relationships with investment executives who understand that questioning safety protocols threatens shareholder returns that depend on systematic consumer deception about deadly mechanical defects hidden behind premium marketing messages. I'd rather be poor and sleep peacefully than rich and complicit in murder. Miranda's words echo through the empty Pinnacle financial tower as she clears out her corner office. The city lights below, flickering like memorial candles for the automotive victims, whose deaths her investment strategies enabled before conscience finally overwhelmed financial calculation and forced her to choose human decency over shareholder returns. 6 months after her decision to expose the automotive conspiracy and divest from manufacturers who treat safety recalls as optional business expenses, Miranda has lost 60% of her wealth to legal challenges, shareholder lawsuits, and systematic destruction of her professional reputation by former allies who view her moral awakening as existential threat to profitable negligence. Jerome enters carrying boxes of his new office supplies, his transformation from invisible janitor to director of corporate ethics and safety, representing the kind of systematic change that occurs when expertise is finally valued over titles and human knowledge is prioritized over corporate hierarchy in decisions that determine whether investment strategies protect or endanger innocent consumers. The partnership between former CEO and former janitor has created unprecedented accountability structures that evaluate automotive investments based on safety records rather than profit projections, requiring comprehensive engineering audits before financial commitments and mandatory disclosure of all safety testing data to prevent the regulatory capture that enabled automotive manufacturers to treat consumer deaths as acceptable percentage points in profit equations. Miranda's remaining wealth has been restructured around ethical investment principles that prioritize human impact over financial returns, creating portfolio strategies that measure success in lives preserved rather than dividends generated through systematic indifference to mechanical failures that her former board members continue to enable through regulatory influence and legal strategies. The mathematical precision that once characterized her wealth accumulation now applies to preventing automotive deaths through investment criteria that require engineering excellence over cost reduction in manufacturing decisions that determine whether consumers receive transportation technology or disguised weapons that malfunction without warning. Jerome's expertise has been systematically applied to developing safety evaluation protocols that expose the automotive negligence Miranda's former investments enabled through regulatory capture and legal strategies designed to hide mechanical defects from consumers who trust that government oversight protects them from preventable deaths caused by corporate decisions that prioritize shareholder returns over human life. His experience as both safety inspector and grieving father provides unique insight into how automotive manufacturers exploit regulatory loopholes to delay recall notifications while maximizing the window of opportunity for defective vehicles to claim additional victims whose families receive legal settlements instead of living relatives. Systematic murder disguised as statistical inevitability through corporate structures that distance executives from the blood on their hands. The new investment criteria that Jerome has developed require real-time safety monitoring, independent engineering verification, and mandatory disclosure of all testing data to prevent the systematic deception that enabled automotive deaths through coordinated conspiracy between manufacturers, investment firms, and regulatory agencies that prioritized industry concerns over public safety. Miranda's reduced financial empire now operates according to principles that treat human life as invaluable rather than calculating optimal death tolls for maximum profitability. Investment strategies that require engineering excellence and safety innovation rather than cost reduction and regulatory avoidance in manufacturing decisions that determine whether automotive technology protects or endangers the families who trust that premium prices guarantee mechanical reliability. The transformation has been professionally devastating but morally redemptive, as Miranda discovers that wealth accumulated through systematic indifference to human suffering feels different from money earned through investment strategies that prioritize life preservation over profit maximization, that financial success built on preventable deaths tastes like ash, while reduced returns from ethical investments provide psychological satisfaction that no amount of blood money could ever generate. Malik's recovery has accelerated dramatically as he witnesses his father's transformation from invisible janitor to recognized expert whose automotive knowledge is finally being used to prevent the mechanical failures that killed his mother and destroyed his sense of security about transportation technology that he now understands can be designed to protect rather than endanger innocent families. Real wealth is measured in lives saved, not dollars accumulated. Miranda speaks these words at the congressional hearing, where she testifies about the automotive conspiracy that her former board orchestrated through systematic regulatory capture and investment strategies designed to make preventable deaths profitable for executives willing to sacrifice consumer safety for shareholder returns. 18 months after her decision to choose conscience over wealth, Miranda and Jerome sit side by side at the witness table, their testimony exposing decades of coordinated negligence that transformed automotive manufacturing from transportation technology into mass casualty events through mechanical defects hidden behind premium marketing campaigns. The pinnacle financial documents they've provided to federal investigators detail how investment firms systematically enabled automotive murders through portfolio strategies that prioritized profit over human life, regulatory influence that weakened safety oversight, and legal frameworks that made wrongful death settlements cheaper than engineering improvements designed to protect innocent consumers from preventable mechanical failures. Senator Patricia Morrison holds up internal emails showing how Miranda's former board calculated optimal death tolls for maximum profitability while coordinating recall timing across multiple manufacturers to minimize stock price impact, treating safety notifications as market management tools rather than urgent public health communications. Jerome's expert testimony explains how automotive safety defects could be prevented through engineering solutions that manufacturers refuse to implement because killing consumers generates more profit than protecting them through comprehensive recalls that might reduce quarterly earnings and executive compensation packages. The hearing room fills with family members of automotive victims whose preventable deaths generated legal settlements treated as operational expenses by corporations that measure success in dividend payments rather than human lives preserved through safety investments that Miranda's reformed company now requires before financial commitments. Jerome's transformation from invisible janitor to director of corporate safety ethics has created revolutionary accountability standards that other investment firms are adopting as public pressure grows for financial responsibility in automotive portfolio management that previously prioritized profit over human life through systematic regulatory capture and legal strategies designed to hide safety defects from consumers. The Washington Institute for Corporate Accountability now operates under his leadership, using automotive expertise gained through personal tragedy to develop investment criteria that require engineering excellence and real-time safety monitoring, rather than cost reduction and regulatory avoidance in manufacturing decisions that determine whether vehicles protect or endanger families. Miranda's remaining wealth funds comprehensive safety research that has already identified mechanical defects in over 40 vehicle models, forcing manufacturers to implement recalls that her former investment strategies would have delayed or hidden through legal challenges and regulatory influence, designed to protect shareholder returns while endangering innocent consumers. The Malik Washington Memorial Foundation provides scholarships for engineering students who commit to prioritizing human life over corporate profit in design decisions that determine whether automotive technology serves humanitarian purposes or generates casualty events through systematic negligence. Federal legislation now requires investment firms to disclose automotive safety records before portfolio inclusion, preventing the regulatory capture that enabled Miranda's former board to profit from preventable deaths while maintaining psychological distance from victims through corporate structures that transformed wrongful death into statistical inevitability. The mathematical precision that once characterized Miranda's wealth accumulation through automotive negligence now applies to preventing mechanical failures through investment accountability that measures success in lives preserved rather than dividends generated through systematic indifference to safety defects that her reformed portfolio strategies are designed to eliminate through engineering requirements and regulatory transparency. The personal transformation extends beyond professional success into genuine human connection as Miranda and Jerome have built friendship based on shared recognition that real wealth requires using financial resources to preserve rather than endanger innocent lives through investment decisions that treat consumer safety as moral imperative rather than optional expense subject to cost-benefit analysis. Their partnership has become model for how corporate accountability can emerge from personal awakening, when executives finally acknowledge the human cost of systematic negligence that generates profit through preventable suffering, disguised as acceptable market risk by regulatory capture and legal strategies designed to protect shareholder returns while endangering families. Malik's recovery has progressed dramatically as he channels his analytical obsessions into positive research that contributes to automotive safety improvements rather than fearful investigation of corporate conspiracy that previously dominated his trauma responses to his mother's preventable death in a vehicle with mechanical defects that manufacturers knew about but chose to hide. The boy's latest project involves developing smartphone applications that alert consumers to safety recalls and mechanical defects before they purchase vehicles, technology that empowers families to make informed decisions about transportation safety rather than trusting that premium prices guarantee engineering excellence instead of sophisticated marketing campaigns designed to hide deadly flaws. Miranda's downtown office now displays photographs of automotive victims whose families her testimony has helped through legal proceedings that hold manufacturers accountable for systematic negligence, human faces that remind her daily why choosing conscience over wealth was necessary to align her actions with values that prioritize life preservation over profit maximization through investment strategies. The empty spaces where corporate awards once stood have been filled with letters from families whose lives were saved by automotive recalls that her reformed investment criteria forced manufacturers to implement. Thank you notes that provide psychological satisfaction no amount of blood money could ever generate for executives willing to acknowledge how portfolio decisions determine whether automotive technology protects or endangers innocent consumers who trust that regulatory oversight prevents preventable deaths through corporate accountability.